Let's dig deeper into the president's budget proposal now with Capital Alpha senior political analyst. That's James Lucier joining us from Washington. James, thank you very much for your time. Looking at one big number, $3 trillion. That is the hope that this budget will cut the deficit by over the next 10 years. We've been talking that this really doesn't seem possible, or at least not in anything less than a la-la land. What do you think?
Well, Kathleen got it exactly right. She practically stole the lines I had in my mind, which is, this is a messaging document. And it takes a couple of cycles before a document like this has a real impact on policy. In fact, we have a 2-year budget that sets totally different targets that Congress adopted. But I do think over time this is sending important signals that President Trump is really ready to shake up the bureaucracy, and he's also moving the Republicans away from their 10-year balanced budget goal, which is something that's made it impossible to have a rational conversation about the budget on the Hill.
All right, now you just picked that up. The plan won't balance the budget in 10 years. What do you think about that? Do you think that you're saying that that shouldn't be kept then?
Well, I think it's admitting reality. We often criticize presidential budgets for being nothing more than suggestions that, we've been calling presidential budgets dead on arrival since the Reagan administration. But the reality is that the Republicans have boxed themselves in on the Hill with 10-year budget balance. And having the president give them some cover, say, hey, guys, we can't meet our domestic spending objectives, plus major priorities like the military, unless we back off this a little bit. And maybe we can have more rational discussions about the budget in future congressional cycles. So it's a good
James,
thing.
hold on a second here. We have some new headlines coming through here with H&A. The HKICM, they're to sell its Kai-Tech sites to Henderson Land for 16 billion Hong Kong dollars. Of course, so we have been talking long telegraphed here that the debt pressures that H&A has been facing, and they have been divesting some of their assets. This is going to be a big one here, obviously, involving the Hong Kong former airport there. There were some reports just last week about how they were seeking further loan extensions for the Hong Kong site, but it seems like they have found a buyer so far, which is Henderson Land. We'll continue to watch those headlines coming through from H&A for $16 billion Hong Kong dollars for that site. All right, in the meantime here, let's bring it back to James and talk a little bit more about the budget concerns that we are seeing in the U.S. James, obviously we've been talking about infrastructure as well, and this plan, of course, is seeing a lot of naysayers as well from Democrats as well as Republicans. Does this level of investment from the federal government even match or even get close to matching the needs of what you're seeing in the crumbling roads and roads and infrastructures and airports in America?
Well, Donald Trump is famous for building gigantic, opulent hotels with not a single nickel of his own money involved. He gets it done, and that's really very much the approach they take to infrastructure as well, that we can make the peanut butter go a lot further if we spread it thinner and also spread it in the right places. And Trump promises that with some deregulation and other assistance from the federal government, we can make important projects happen that would have been frozen otherwise. I think the infrastructure program is actually extremely elegant and extremely well thought out. The problem, of course, is that he doesn't have a revenue source designated for it. He does allocate $200 billion over 10 years, but he really doesn't address one of the key issues, which is renewing the Highway Trust Fund, or, in fact, getting other revenue to pay for this.
And this actually relies heavily on state governments as well in terms of, reducing the process in order to get permits approved. Also, they're trying to really kind of, it's much less than what the Democrats were expecting here when it comes to the federal side of things. So do you think these local municipalities can actually come up with the money somehow?
I think so. Obviously, there's a market clearing price, so where supply meets demand, things happen. And Trump is basically saying, look, the cupboard is bare. We can't expect the federal government to finance 80% of everything, but there may be stuff that the federal government could finance for 20%. Let's focus on that, and let's try to take steps where both state and private sector funds might be leveraged in order to get a few top priority things done. It's like the principle of Pareto optimization. You get 20% of the or 80% of the benefit from the top 20% of the projects. So in effect, President Trump is saying, saying we've got to winnow things out, we've got to use our money in a more rational basis, and I think he's setting the table for better use of those funds when they become available. And I think that the funds actually might become available, for instance, in a future Congress. If you have a Democratic Congress that is willing to spend more money and willing to make a deal with President Trump, he's got the plan here. If Democrats are willing to add the money to raise some taxes, Trump might do that. They have signaled in the past that they would be open to a gasoline tax, just not in this cycle. So I think that the infrastructure plan is an important play. It's a long-term play. It's a good play. And it may be one of the things investors should look for if we have a Democratic Congress at the end of the next cycle.
Right. Very much desired on both sides of the aisle. One of the few things there. James, one thing you were talking about, the rational use of spending. $23 billion for border security and immigration sounds fine, but $18 billion of that for the wall. Personally, I'm surprised it got this far. Do you think this has legs to continue on?
Well, I think the reality, as Kathleen said, this is a messaging document. So not only is he saying, I want to rearrange the bureaucracy, which would take years to happen, but he's also signaling the priority. And the reality is that if he got 1/10 of that, $1.8 billion, or even the 1.5 we've heard people talk about in the context of the DACA negotiations, that's enough to make an important start. Get a little bit of border security done, whether it's a wall or not, and that makes all the difference between something and nothing. President Trump needs to get off the dime. He needs to break the inertia. He needs to do something, however small. So something a lot less than $18 billion is probably going to be a victory. But he's pushing for it, which is what he's famous for doing.
All right, very quickly, as a political analyst, James, how does this impact potentially the midterm elections and the political calculus, if anything?
I don't think it has a real impact on the midterm elections because, again, the president's budget tends to be a one-week story. The president's budget sends signals in Washington, but the public at large doesn't look at these things. The public at large is more focused on results than process. They want to see the tax cuts working. They want to see evidence of a government that is actually working in a relatively stable, predictable way. They like the teleprompter Trump, not the Twitter Trump. And I think that more teleprompter Trump and just the sheer momentum we've seen from the tax cuts may be the one chance Republicans have to hold on to that congressional majority, which frankly is endangered right now.